welcome to the Pop Occulture show. We're back. Yay. I'm Lilith Dorsey, author, filmmaker, dancer, choreographer, and a whole bunch of other things. But I'm going to kick it to my co-host right now.
I'm Jason Winslade, PhD, author, writer, and producer. And we are definitely back. It's been a little while. We had that little Panini thing happening. We just decided it was time to bring our stuff back onto the airwaves, the ether, or the internet, or whatever the thing is. But we decided to make it a little different this time. And a lot of people are doing stuff on witch movies and things like that. But we wanted to get weird up in here and do a little bit more just fun, out there, obscure stuff, and just see what happens.
I'm excited, though. I'm excited we're back. I really am. And I think that we had a lot of good following. Hopefully we didn't lose them all. Hopefully we'll get new people jumping on this. But I think it makes a lot more sense for you and me and whoever we get as our guest to be weird, because that's how we roll. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And so the topic for this week is going to be about the crossover between the occult world and the world of burlesque dance. But we're also going to talk about just dance in general, too, in terms of how dance and spirituality coexist. But we're going to have our illustrious guest, the Sorceress of Shimmy, the hottie from the Illumi-Naughtie, Vivian Meretrix, talking about burlesque. But first, I wanted to ask about, I know you have a background as a dancer, and I wanted to hear some about how you incorporated that your dance work in with your spiritual practice and on stage and in ritual.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just got back from my NYU reunion in New York last weekend, and my work there in grad school was always focused on dance on film, and specifically occult or magical dance on film. So even though I'm a dancer, and that was always my academic work as well, and I was blessed. Probably, I think the same year that I finished grad school, I was blessed to dance for jazz musician Dr. John. What is it? 8, 9, 10 Grammys now. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but it was a beautiful thing for me to be on stage at Bonnaroo and Jazz Fest and things like that in front of tens of thousands of people, bringing real New Orleans voodoo to the public and bringing it in a way that was, I think, non-threatening, which is something that we get a lot when we talk about voodoo or voodoo dance. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but just the history of dance in performance on film being something that's occult, it's got a whole nother kind of bag attached to it. And a lot of times it's negative, when in reality, I think it's really beautiful and sensual and expressive. And I think that being able to bring that out with Dr. John was one of the finest moments in my life. And I miss him every day. And it was really an honor to be around him and to work with him for so many years.
And, my experience as a producer and as a musician myself, I mean, I put together a lot of shows that bring together live music and drumming with dance, sometimes belly dance, sometimes traditional folk dance from various cultures, and so I'm constantly surrounded by dancers, and the way that we work together with, the organization's called Ritual Rhythms, and we work together by bringing together that sense of ritual with live performance. So there's always been this strong crossover between movement, spirituality, and the occult. And specifically with burlesque, there's a really rich history connecting those two. So we're going to bring in our guest in just a minute here, and we're going to talk about that. So I'd like to introduce our first guest for this season of the Pop Occulture show. She is the Sorceress of Shimmy. She is the hottie from the Illumi-Naughtie, ordained priestess and dancer, Vivian Meretrix. Yay!
Yeah. Hi, Jason. Hi, Lila. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
But first off, tell us about you, tell us about yourself and how you first found this connection between the occult and the burlesque scene, the history of burlesque.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I am an ordained priestess in the through the OTO. That's the Ordo Templi Orientis, that was not originally founded by Aleister Crowley, but definitely like refurbished and rehashed to its modern state by him. So it's a lot of that style magic. At the same time that I was studying to be an ordained priestess in that spiritual tradition, I was also taking belly dance and burlesque classes. And my research through both mediums always just kind of kept coming back to where I was discovering a lot of women that were powerhouses in their own right, but were often being overshadowed by the men around them. And that's a greater problem in the world in general, and also especially in occult history. So from the belly dance standpoint, I found, which we might touch on a little bit later, of where occultism and belly dance met in Chicago. So being that I'm a Chicago girl, that really resonated with me. And then through the Gnostic Mass, there is that's the main spirit, that is the main ritual of the OTO, is Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, and it is a performance art ritual. And so that tied into my first love, which is dance, because it's, in my opinion, dance is the first religious ritual. We danced around fires, to keep the terrors of the night at bay. And I feel that rhythm is still very much a part of the human's psychology as well as spirituality. And ultimately, like, our first rhythm was the heartbeat, and anything else is an elaboration coming back to that point.
So there's this whole thing with Crowley, and I remember studying this, writing about it in grad school, where he was doing this thing called the Rites of Eleusis in 1910, I think, in London, where he was basically doing like this multimedia performance art thing. And I think Alan Moore tried to do something very similar in the early 2000s. But where there's like musician, live music, dance, there was ritual, there was and he would sometimes, I think, spike the punch, literally, like putting a little bit of hallucinogens in the
that's not allowed at any actual event these days,
right,
by the way.
Right, but that was
this is an FYI.
Yeah, but that was a little added thing that to get audiences really on that same page of ecstatic, So he was working with a bunch of people. I think Victor Newberg and Leila Waddell, which we'll talk about.
That's where we first showcase what I like to refer to them as Shimmy Saints. How in the Gnostic Mass, Crowley made Gnostic saints, which were pretty much people living or passed on that he just felt brought forth the magical current that he was working with. So he thought they were in that vibe. So Leila Waddell is mentioned as one of those. Leila Waddell was also, she was dating Crowley at the time too, but she was a concert violinist and was actually a little more well known for her violin work. And there's a very famous photo that we'll add in later, where she's in like ritual robes and she's holding her violin, and it's from that production. It was covered in it was really Crowley trying to bring forth the idea of, in the ancient Greek and Roman and Egyptian rites, they had religious theater, and doing a ceremony wasn't what we would consider today, where there was just like someone standing up and talking and delivering kind of a message. There was actual pageantry that was evolved, and the pageantry itself was like a magical technology. The kinetic energy of the motions that they were doing was also part of the magical ritual that was being done. And Crowley was wanting to bring that back into the idea of religious observances, and he was really big on that.
So tell us about that connection between Crowley and burlesque historically.
Well, Crowley actually managed a burlesque troupe, and most people aren't aware of that. It was called the Ragged Ragtime Girls. It featured Leila Waddell, who was the violinist we just talked about, and this was the project that they did after the rites of, I'm always bad at
Luther.
pronouncing this, but yeah. Um, and they so this was like about a year or so. I think those rights were in like 1910. Fast forward to 1913, and Crowley, Leila, some other women were traveling across with Victor Newberg as well. Were traveling across Europe doing the Ragged Ragtime Girls Burlesque Review. And so they were touring through Europe doing that when he came to St. Petersburg, Russia. And that is where he wrote the Gnostic Mass, the main religious ceremony for the OTO. And in most, like even on the Wikipedia articles and stuff, it just says, oh, he wrote the Gnostic Mass in 1913, St. Petersburg, Russia. They do not mention that he was managing a burlesque troupe, that Leila was there. And then when you look at the actual, and I was an ordained priestess in this tradition, studying burlesque before I even found out about this, because it's, again, just a way that women are obfuscated. She was there. Her influence is important, especially when you look at the structure of the ritual. You can see the burlesque influence in it, in the priestess, and how she is represented and the things that she does within the ceremony. And so I feel that just blew my mind, to be like, there is literally a religious tradition that is still going strong today. There are Gnostic masses being done across the world as we speak. And so many of them don't even know that a burlesque performer helped influence this tradition. And I feel it's high time that she's given her due.
Do we have writings from her or something like that? Like, what's left of her?
We have the playbill from the Ragged Ragtime Girls.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So documented. We have Crowley's own writings from his own diary, which he was pretty prolific in doing. We have his own diaries talking about that. Of course, he's always talking more about himself. But yeah, so we do have proof that, like, this is what they were doing at that time, but it's just not given proper notice. And so as someone who was ordained, in this tradition and was performing this mass, and then taking burlesque classes and just finding out, like, it was almost like finding out like a hidden ancestor, almost like, just like, oh my gosh, she was doing this. Now, she was doing a lot more of like the violin and stuff, but she was involved in that, and burlesque was happening. Like, it was the whole reason he was in St. Petersburg at the time, and no one credits it as being an influence. And the whole point about burlesque, which is not just occult, but like to branching out into a broader topic, is that burlesque history is feminist history. It's civil rights history. It is very often in the cabarets, are where people would meet that are more the free-thinking avant-garde. But like there's grander contributions there that are very important, and we often get discounted just for being women and just for being willing to bear ourselves, our flesh or our souls, on stage. And then that's all people really like look at or remember. And so that's something that, again, I like to bring, is one of the reasons that I started the Illumi-Naughtie Occult Burlesque, because as I continue to grow in that world, most burlesque performers ascribe to some form of alternative spirituality. And though we shimmy on stage and things like that, you often don't get them to express that. They're trying to, they're making an act that's bookable that they can get paid on. So I wanted to create a space where they could just show that ecstaticism, whichever it is.
So tell us about the Illumi-Naughtie Burlesque show that you're producing.
Well, it's October 7th, 9 p.m. at the Newport Theater here in Chicago. And it's a long ritual. There's every act is linked together. We are building an altar on stage, and each act features an element of the altar that we are building. And then the final act is a group number that is also a dance ritual as well. And we are invoking Lilith, not that one, but namesake, as well as other divine feminine goddesses. And it's to the purpose of just growing that connection with divinity, particularly divine feminine energy within yourself, and letting that radiate forward. And we're playing with occultic themes and tropes. So one of the things is the language. Instead of usually like the stage assistant in a burlesque who gathers up the clothes after the burlesque performer has shed them is called the stage kitten. We are referring to them as the stage acolyte. And the MC is like the what did we say was going to be like the name for that? It's like the magicus supremus, like sort of thing. So we're using language to train the thought, as well as the we're playing with aestheticism, which honestly performance in general is what plays with aesthetic themes to create a certain idea within the audience. And there's actually quite a history of occultism and burlesque and playing with those kind of themes.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by this connection between divine feminine and it manifesting in the context of burlesque. And I know within my work, it certainly manifests with sacred dance when we talk about Catherine Dunham and things like that. So I'm just curious what your take on it is, or if somebody knew nothing about this, what they would want to, really need to know in order to move forward in a responsible way and respectful way.
Sure. Well, there's belly dance, you see kind of more of a clearer lineage, but where it goes into like starting off like Mata Hari is one of the more famous names in like burlesque, and she used iconography from Egyptian and Indian iconography to have the idea of like doing this sacred like kind of temple dance that she would perform in salons. And so then that's where she really kind of foreran that. Later on, though, like I was saying before, like these salons, cabarets, these reviews, these were places where the artists, the free thinkers could gather without the norms like raining on their parade, and were able to, and so it's not surprising that you'd see a lot of space for expressionism in there. Other burlesque there's this whole, the one that's easiest to kind of trace are where they use, I have a presentation I actually call like Satan and the Showgirl, because the views of satanic themes have been used, are the most popular. Throughout the 1920s, there was actually, there's a whole list of gals that would do an act where they're dancing with the devil, and it's kind of showing, I think, just honestly the human consciousness of wanting to play with taboos. And by playing with something that is taboo, you are somehow experiencing something greater, something beyond, something like the mystic. In the one of the funnier ones that I came across was for it was in 1922, and it was this gal who had a salon thing that was called Sneering at Satan, and she had like a bust of Satan, and she's like at him, because you couldn't say like, oh, we're promoting it or things like that, so I'm sneering at it. But the whole idea was that like I'm sneering at these negative views, and I'm doing something sexy with myself besides it, and I'm feeling empowered. And going forward, one of the more famous more going into much, she goes from like the 1940s through the 70s, and she actually was still performing up into her 90s, was a burlesque performer who went by the name Satan's Little Angel. And she popularized the fire nipple tassel twirl. and fire performance on stage with burlesque, because she's Satan's angel, bringing the fires of hell raining down, but being like sexy and beautiful with it. So there's, from those who took it from like temple dancey kind of things to sneering at it, toward just being like, I'm Satan's little angel on stage. There's this line that it gives you license to liberate yourself and to play with these things. You as a, priestess in your own right, a lot of people think of like voodoo and they think pincushions, or they have such a misnomer about it. And so that's how I felt also with like burlesque and occultism, is this idea of, a lot of times even going to like Anton LaVey, it was more focused on him, but there are the famous pictures of like the naked girl across his big like altar and stuff, because something about like nudity and playing with those taboos, again, it's shocking someone into a different state of being. And then we see, with like Leila Waddell, and then from like the 50s, 60s through the 80s, there was Cameron Parsons, who played Babylon in Kenneth Anger's inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. That's a very prolific occultist and artist and avant-garde. Like, she did her own cabarets and stuff as well. So pretty much wherever you've seen like these women kind of gather, we even think of the old witches sabbat, the idea that they're dancing naked around a bonfire.
I only have one pair of friends that sort of work in this sphere, and Gigi LaFemme and her cousin Scarlett Sinclair, they did instead of Satan and this kind of goddess dance, I think it was maybe 2010 or 2011, they did it at the big Las Vegas Burlesque Festival. They did a dance to the moon, which I thought was like, okay, we're going to flip this switch where we're not having it be Satan. We're going to have it be a theme that's more sort of culturally accepted for modern witches, right?
Yeah.
And moving away from it. So, but yeah, I was so happy when we stayed in the Matahari Hotel. I was like running around trying to get the Matahari vibe everywhere. It was great. It was great.
Yeah, we've seen a whole lot of ways that bringing in witchcraft and that there's a few performers in Chicago that have that Bruja vibe that they work with, that kind of aesthetic with their performances. So it's become a popular thing too. And I think you're gonna have some of that in the show. So the show is coming up Saturday, October 7th, and I believe we'll maybe be able to get a little a link or something to buy tickets for that if you're in the Chicago area. And that's at the Newport Theater, which is sort of one of Chicago's main homes for burlesque, I believe, right now.
Yeah, it's actually owned and operated by the burlesque performer Eva LaFiva and Bazooka Joe. And so it really is an amazing space that they run a school for belly dance and for burlesque out of the theater as well. It is a nonprofit space that is really it's all inclusive, it's very body positive, and it's really just some of the best people I've had the chance to work with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Vivian. And I think that's something that everybody can appreciate, that connection between spirituality and dance and movement and music, and and it makes for a fun show too, I'd imagine. So yeah. All right.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Shimmy, shimmy.
Yeah, keep on shimmying.
Keep on shimmying.
All right. So yes, Pop Occulture is back, and we're going to have some shows coming up for you in the coming months. We've got lots of ideas, lots of things cooking. Things like
it's going to be Samhain soon. It's going to be spooky time. Not that it's not always spooky time for some of us, myself included, but I definitely want to do a show about Ken Russell's Gothic. It's a favorite of both of ours, I think,
Yes.
and has been pretty much since it came out, probably before a lot of our viewers were born. But and maybe fingers crossed, we'll see if we can have a special guest for that. And I also wanted to do a spooky show about a famous Brazilian horror film maker, Jose Mojica Marins, and his Coffin Joe series, which I think, again, is definitely wild and obscure and a good fit for our new format.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of stuff that that we want to talk about, with everything from comic books to I found a box of old Twilight Zone magazines from the 80s. That there's so much great stuff in there, that, you know, pre-internet things that are real fun to play around with. So yeah, we're gonna have a whole list of things, and every now and then maybe we'll throw in one of the shows that we like to watch, or you know, things that have been more recent. You know, there's all kinds of fun, you know, pop culture things out there that maybe don't get as much attention as, say, things like we've done before, like The Craft or
Wizard of Oz, yeah.
all that. Well, we're shining a spotlight on the, you know, we are digging into the crossroads of pop culture and occultism, so we might dig a little deeper for this next round. So thanks for joining.
The crossroads at midnight, maybe that's what I feel like we're going to be at.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time at the Pop Occulture Show. I'm Jason Winslade.
Bye. Thank you.
And you are?
Lilith Dorsey.
We'll see you next time.